Welcome to the Inquisitive Minds podcast. This podcast is all about searching for answers to questions oftentimes unexplained or unexplored. We want to engage with new and sometimes old theories, psychology, or philosophy from a research based perspective. Hello, and welcome to the 8th episode of the Inquisitive Minds podcast, where today we're taking a little step back from our normal research based discussion. We're getting into more of a conversation today about cancel culture or cancel culture versus consequence culture, how it's portrayed, what's happening, and kind of what we think about the topic. Try not to be too subjective, try to be more objective about what's going on in the world and then kind of open it up a bit more to a discussion about what we think might be the cause, what we might think will be the pros and the cons of this kind of social movement that's happening today. So, John, how are you doing today? What do you think of this? And are you excited to do a little bit more of a conversation and discussion based podcast?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm totally excited to do a very discussion heavy podcast. I think it'll be a lot of fun. Kind of stepping away from sort of just pure research, which with the
Hmm.
caveat is this is more discussion, sometimes our opinions, so it's less formal. But the topic
Hmm.
itself is quite interesting. 'Cause I didn't really know much going into it. Like I'm not a big Twitter. I don't even have a Twitter. I'm very low
Okay.
social media presence. Like in terms of cancel culture,
Hmm.
I just figured people said something harmful or hateful. They did something harmful, and they would get canceled essentially. And that's
Yeah.
as far as my initial thing was. But the more I looked into it, the breadth of cancel culture seemed to be pretty wide. It went into a lot of
Hmm.
different areas that I did not even think of. Whether that be a good or bad, it's up to your interpretation, I suppose. But
Hmm.
yeah, like what are your Twitter goers? So what were your initial thoughts of cancel culture?
Well, my Twitter presence is also fairly low. I don't really tweet much, but I do kind of scroll, and I like to be in tune with what's going on in the news, and I just kind of use Twitter as a news feed essentially. Of course, when you're on Twitter and using it as a news source, you have biases, and I have my own biases that will give me certain news that I probably am more aligned with. So that's something I have to understand. But with regards to cancel culture, what I initially thought was that we had a group of people who were outing other individuals who were, as you said, had done something egregious, like something racist or misogynistic, that was actionable according to a group of individuals who were also on the same social media platform. Or maybe they had seen them do this thing in real life and they were reporting it on the social media platform. So this to me was mostly a virtuous thing. It was something good, something that was removing harmful individuals from our society. That was my initial thought going in, and doing a bit more research, it didn't. That was that was the initial reason cancel culture came about, but I don't think what it's morphed into, I think, is different. And we'll get into
Hmm.
that. We'll get into that quite a bit. So, Johnny, I wanted you to start us off like we normally do with a definition. What is your kind of maybe it'll be broad, but what do you think is the definition for cancel culture?
For me, the definition is sort of like a modern day ostracism,
Hmm.
like almost like a social shunning. Like it kind of reminded me of ostracism because it's sort of like citizens being like expelled, like any act or acts of ignoring and excluding of an individual or groups by an individual or a group itself. So like
Hmm.
to me that's sort of would be my sort of definition of cancel culture, but like it morphs around so much to in these like today's age that like it probably doesn't encapsulate all of it.
Yeah. I had a similar definition in that used the word ostracism as well. And mine was it's a modern form of ostracism where someone is thrust out of society or professional circles. They are said to be canceled, i.e., cancel culture. Consequences of cancel culture can be a loss of reputation or loss of income and can be hard to recover from. And I think that's one of the different things compared to older forms of ostracism, where if you were kind of ousted in a certain social circle, you could find a new one. You could kind of move, or you could find a new job or something that
Hmm.
kind of made it easier for you to get back to a steady, normal life. But nowadays, because it's so public to everyone, because information is omnipotent, we just we we just can't avoid these kind of cancellations. In some people's regards, they can't get away from them, and they ruin their lives.
Yeah, it sort of
Which,
like follows
mhm,
you around. Like, say,
mhm,
like an employee goes to Google your name, and all of a sudden they see all this stuff from like a few years ago, and how you got fired
mhm,
from this job and that job and this and that. When they're like, oh, I don't want to hire someone that has these views or something, for example. Like,
yeah.
you can't just like walk somewhere else and go somewhere else. It's always there.
It's similar to that of a criminal record, I think, when you're looking for, specifically when you're looking for jobs, is if somebody sees that you have a criminal record, they might be less likely to hire you, right?
Hmm.
And a lot of jobs, well, I think it's mandatory that you give in your criminal record for a job application. So in this case, nowadays, it's almost mandatory that an employer will Google an employee, potential employee, to see what's going on, and that's why people like to make sure that their social media presence is up to date when they're applying for jobs. But if you've been a hot ticket on Twitter or something for because you got canceled, your name comes up, and then what can you do, right? You
Hmm.
cannot move on. And that was one of the biggest cons of cancel culture, but we'll get there. We'll get into that, and we'll also provide some pros. So right now we do our normal history segment. So Johnny, what do you have for history today for cancel culture?
This is like a tough one because like it's since it's sort of like a modern thing with sort of social media.
Mm-hmm.
It's I tried to go beyond that and think of more of like an olden day like cancel culture, and ostracism obviously comes to mind.
Mm-hmm.
So like, to me, sort of like the Scarlet Letter could sort of have some parallels
Oh, okay.
with like people sort of collectively shaming or public humiliation
Mm-hmm.
like by the community. Um
Just for
another
those who
one,
just for
oh
those who
sorry.
don't know, what is the Scarlet Letter? What
um
happened?
she committed adultery
Mm-hmm.
essentially, or I guess like she had an affair, and she had a child, and then I guess the community found out or whatever and was like shaming her and stuff like that for
Yeah.
adultery.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Um and then the other one that sort of came to mind was centered around heresy. So like the
Mm-hmm.
definition of heresy is an opinion that is at odds with what is generally accepted.
Oh, okay. So, we preach critical thinking, and this is one of the things they tell you about critical thinking is just because your beliefs are contrary to what others believe doesn't mean it's necessarily
Ex-
wrong.
exactly. And like, to commit heresy back in the day, like, you were sort of burned or even killed, like you're burned and killed. Like
This is a
today,
religious connotation, though, I
yeah,
believe.
totally.
Yeah. Okay.
But like today, to draw the parallels would be sort of like being canceled. So like
Mm-hmm.
having opposing views, I guess, isn't, and being punished for them isn't something that's totally new.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, the scale of the punishment is obviously dialed way back. But
Yes. Yeah, for sure. In some regards. Right? Like I
yeah,
said before, if you were kind of ostracized within your community, you could go to a different community.
yeah,
But that's, not that far back in history. Because back then, when you're talking about the Scarlet Letter, I'm assuming that woman didn't have the means to travel outside of her community. So we're speaking of like a pre-internet modern era, I
yeah.
think, where yeah, for sure. Now, um, I didn't have much for history on this topic because I was thinking more of like a personal history. Like, what was the first time I encountered cancel culture in my life? And it was kind of shown what could happen to someone. So, Johnny, I want you to start us off. Do you have a personal example of cancel culture?
None that was like that hit like close to home or like that really resonated with me or like it was mostly like oh like I see another person getting canceled or this person
Hmm.
like the one that I probably followed the closest would be like the Smash Bros related one last year.
Oh,
Um
okay.
but to that extent like nothing big or anything. Like my examples I have aren't any crazy or big popular ones.
Okay.
What
Yeah,
about what's your big one that
well, the first time I've ever seen it was in 2015 when I was watching the news and we had all been, on YouTube, and there was a YouTube sensation going around I, where a man, when interviewed by a female reporter, would, instead of answering the female reporter's questions, just say "f her in the p," and "f her right in the p," and it was like something you probably remember. And there was a lot of videos circulating around the same type of thing, and it was kind of like back in the day, a lot of men had a laugh, and nowadays it's terribly, terribly misogynistic and kind of gross, and it still is gross. It was gross then, it's gross now. But I remember watching the news, and a man at a Toronto football, like soccer TFC game, was being interviewed by a female reporter, and he was answering a question, and another guy came up right behind him and was like, "F her right in the P," and the female reporter like just had enough because she said, I get this like every day. I get this 10 times a day. I'm trying to report. I'm trying to do my job, and men are just doing this same one-liner and laughing their ass off about it. And what happened was, she, instead of just letting it go, she confronted the guy. She's like, "Hey, why did you say this? Why did you think this was funny?" Like, and she was completely in the right to do so. And he was like, "Oh, we're just having a laugh. It's just a joke." Like, she says, "No, I have to deal with this every day. Like, this is insulting to me." And he's like, "Oh, it's not about you." And she's like, "Well, how is it not? Right? How is it not about me? How is it not about women in the workplace at this job?" So why I'm bringing this up is because he got fired from his job. He worked for a company. He worked for Hydro One, and he got fired.
hmm
I think it wasn't actually that guy. I'm not sure what happened to the guy who said it, but it was another guy who was defending him, who got fired from Hydro One, and that's crushing, right? So this kind of thing, we'll come back to it about people getting fired for doing certain things online, but that was
hmm
my first view of it, and I did a follow up, and I just looked back at it, and he did get his job back. He got it. He was fired in May 13th, 2015. Got his
yeah
job back in November, 2015, and I think that has to do with the Canadian laws of firing an individual, which
hmm
we will get into as well, because there's a fair bit of difference between how the United States and how Canada deals with somebody getting fired. So, what what do you think of that one? You remember that
I
controversy at all?
totally remember that one. That's funny. Like
Yeah.
that was the one that you brought up. Like I totally did not have that like in my memory at all
Hmm.
until you brought that up. I just remember watching the specific clip of her at the soccer game or whatever
Hmm.
reporting
Hmm.
and the guy coming up behind. Like I remember watching that and remember seeing him getting like fired and stuff.
Hmm.
I don't remember what my original thoughts were, but like I I obviously don't think he should have done that at all. Like to
Hmm.
me that shows like a potential pro to cancel culture. Like obviously it's like something harmful that he's saying.
Hmm. So then the question becomes, and I guess this is where we're going to get into our discussion. Well, I also want to add the caveat that he is now banned from all different MLSE events. And if you don't know what
hmm
MLSE is, that's all the Toronto big sporting events. So Raptors, Maple Leafs, and
TFC.
TFC. He can't ever go back into those venues unless they lift the ban for some reason, which is pretty terrible if you're a big fan of Toronto sports. So that would be kind of crushing. But the question becomes, is that a fireable offense? Do we feel as though he should have lost his job, his livelihood, potentially his wife's livelihood, and his kids' livelihood if he had those? Um, Is that enough to fire someone? And obviously, the court in Canada found as though it wasn't because he got his job back and he must have appealed. So,
Hmm.
what are your thoughts on that portion of the cancel culture?
It's it's a hard argument to have because it's something he did outside of work, right? So it wasn't like he did it on work hours or work time or in the presence of his work or whatever. So it's something that he's doing outside of that. So it's on one hand it's super rough that like any sort of action that you do that is potentially seen as wrong, or like obviously his case it was like it's hard to argue that that was misogynistic or not, right? Like it totally was.
Yeah.
But like lesser ones that are sort of just having an opposite opinion
Hmm.
and getting canceled, like, and then losing your job or income off that is just super hard to justify.
Hmm.
um because like obviously income and work is super important.
Yeah. And that's what when going into this cancel culture research, the small research that we did, I kind of thought it was only for people who are public figures, only for those who have some sort of weight to their words, weight to their actions, whether it
Yeah.
be actors or politicians or influencers, which is now a very broad term, but that's what I kind of thought it was only for. But it's definitely it's grown. It's grown more and more to those people have um, who have just normal day to day lives, right?
Hmm.
So I think I think we've kind of covered how cancel culture is evolving, but I want to go to the source and kind of figure out why did it start to begin with? Johnny, do
Hmm.
you have any thoughts on how it
Well,
got started?
like the way I sort of like view it is like because of like the way technology and social media is, like everything is so far reaching, like
Hmm.
everything is global, everything's sort of like under this magnifying glass, like these ideas and things that people believe, like back in the day they never made it very far, they never made it outside their circles. Like in order like back in the day, like you'd have to get on your horse and ride to another town and be like
Yeah,
to like it's totally different now. Like it's you could talk to someone all the way across half the world and they're gonna have such a different upbringing and environment and their views are gonna be totally different. Like a rural American
a
with like a
rural America.
mega
Yeah,
city goer is gonna have way different opinions and views of specific things.
yeah.
And like I think that's sort of where these difference of opinions become like start, and that's sort of maybe where like the canceling begins, because a lot of canceling is just like people like expressing a different view.
Hmm.
So these I feel like these people like say like they're in the minority and they're trying to express a view and they're getting like attacked, like they almost feel like their ideals are getting like attacked, like their culture, their beliefs or traditions, they're kind of being like viewed in a light that is like racist or sexist and bigoted, and that sort of makes them really angry.
Yeah.
So like that I could see why that's sort of why they sort of hate, like conservatives in general sort of hate cancel culture,
Hmm.
because like the far left is just dumping on all their views and like saying they're like super racist and stuff,
Hmm.
which to an extent some is and some is not, but it's just that difference of opinion and viewpoints.
Right. Yeah, I think so. What you kind of covered there for sure is how on the right wing people are kind of they have certain opinions that are not agreeing with people on the left wing. But I think how cancel culture started is with a group of people who don't have a lot of privilege, let's say, or like people who kind of they had less of a voice in society and they felt as though society was holding them down or holding them back. And these can be people of color or women or minorities of any kind, right, that are kind of getting pushed out of normal society. And as a white male, I have to kind of I have to say, like, we are probably the most privileged, and we kind of have the biggest step up, really. And what people were doing was they were using social media as a means to level the playing field. Essentially, they were holding accountable those who had power, and specifically those who, not those who had power, but specifically those who were abusing their power for evil means, I guess. Yeah, evil being not the best word, but
Hmm.
uh, how I would describe it. So, so what they were doing is they're organizing as a group, and we'll talk about how government can play a role in certain cases, what because somebody literally breaks the law and then it's found out. But these are people who haven't broken the law and were still abusing their power in some way, whether it be through racist actions or um, misogynistic actions, right? That needed that those people with less power believed was an overreach and wanted to cancel them and make them pay, I guess, for being too crazy with their power. So that to me is the origin. And then with what you're saying, it for sure is linked because people don't think that their actions are cancelable, right? They
Hmm.
feel like they don't fall into the category of overreaching with their power, and this is where the divide begins, and this is where people really have issues with what's going on. So,
Yeah,
I
to
yeah, go
build
ahead.
on like on your point, I think it has a lot to do with like the internet is sort of like the wild west. Like there's few regulations, like there's no state controlled policing,
Right.
and sort of the public coming together to sort of fill this gap, I feel like is sort of like a form of cancel culture.
Hmm.
Like it's a form of like a cultural boycott. Like they feel like they have like some agency.
Hmm.
They can sort of band together and hold people accountable, like you
Hmm.
were saying. Like, and then like yeah, so that's where I think that sort of stems from.
Hmm.
Whereas like if but on the other hand, it makes it very hard to express certain opinions, because if they're gonna like express their like sort of agency and kind of cult like cancel people, what exactly is sort of their threshold? Like it comes to the point where it almost like it limits this conversation, because it almost feels like you're walking on thin ice. If you
Right.
say the one wrong thing that opposes this kind of brigade, essentially you could be canceled.
Hmm.
It kind of stifles debate and conversation. Like it can make even marginalized groups feel even more hesitant to speak out. Like you were saying, like that they can sort of hold people accountable, but at the same time, like the white people like us are super privileged. Like to us, it'd probably be the same sort of argument going the opposite way, that they can feel marginalized and attacked just as easily as them coming together to hold someone like white accountable, right?
Hmm.
Um, yeah.
So I think from there we've kind of listed a good amount of pros and cons. I wanted to get into some specific examples because I was listening to a TED talk by a man named John Ronson, and he was explaining, and the name of the TED talk was "How One Tweet Can Ruin Your Life," and this was explaining about a lady whose name will remain nameless, I guess, but she was in a small company and she had like 150 Twitter followers, and she would tweet like little jokes or whatever. And one day she was traveling to Africa and she was getting off the plane and she said she tweeted out to her followers a little joke that pretty much went like this: landing in Africa, hopefully I won't get AIDS. Haha, just kidding, I'm white. So you can kind of
Huh.
see where the issue is with this tweet.
Hmm.
Um, it seems pretty gross on the surface, but it's less so from her. What she was really trying to do was make a joke about how privileged white
What,
people were,
totally.
like an in joke, right? like a joke that is a bit meta,
Mm-hmm.
that has a layer. But what Twitter did to this joke was take it on face value that she was absurdly racist. And this tweet, it doesn't it's not a very sanitized tweet, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It comes off really rough. So what ended up happening was a lot of people on Twitter found out about this tweet. They started they started calling her out. There was an obvious concerted effort to cancel her. And what happens when these situations arise is that a large group of people will start using it for monetization, or usually there's people who are trying to support a foundation. So they're like, "Oh, so and so is saying she hopefully she doesn't get AIDS. Why don't you donate to this AIDS foundation kind of thing?" So these people jump on, and then
Mm-hmm.
there's the people who are doing the in-depth research. Okay, who does she work for? Has she said anything like this in her past? Um, who like where does she live? Where is she from? These are the in-depth researchers. Then there are the people who just call for her to be fired. They're just like, fire this lady. We need to get rid of her. She's terrible. She's awful in society. We have less of these people in society. And then there's the people who start lashing back out at her, calling her vicious things,
Yeah.
saying awful things that were like 10 times worse than what she said. Like, I hope you get AIDS, or I hope somebody has unconsensual sex with you and gives you AIDS and you get pregnant, like all this crazy, crazy stuff on Twitter.
Yeah.
But of course, in the end, what ends up happening is she loses her job and she can't find employment elsewhere, right? So I wanted to bring this up because this is kind of how most cancellations go nowadays,
Yeah.
where an individual says or does something wrong in the light, like you're saying, according to what people think is right and wrong.
Yeah.
Even though if you were to just ask her, what did you mean by this tweet? She was saying, I was making a joke about how privileged white people are. It's less offensive. It's
Yeah.
still not great, but it's less offensive. Um, and then you kind of, you, yeah. So what happens is that people just take this and then it turns into a snowball and it just rolls and rolls and rolls and she ends
It
up losing
goes
her livelihood.
yeah, it goes past like what it's meant to be. Like people just take it way too serious.
Hmm.
Like this is I think we probably have loads of examples of this type of thing where someone does something like borderline and
Hmm.
you're like okay, like maybe you shouldn't have said that. But then there's like this big group of people that take it way too far.
Hmm.
And like to me like it does more social bad than it does social good. Like one cancellation
Hmm.
of someone's livelihood, but also like constant harassment. And like one of the Smash Bros examples, like Zero,
Hmm.
he was like essentially caught for like grooming a minor and stuff. He got canceled and this and that, right? Like fair, he did something he should not have been doing.
Hmm.
But like the constant, I assume the harassment just kept going, and it followed him. And just recently it came out that he was like he attempted a suicide attempt,
Wow.
which like then all of a sudden that social good of canceling him I think gets to the point where it becomes like almost a social bad because it's just taken way too far.
Yeah. And I think what we want to talk about with regards to something like that is why doesn't the justice system step in? Or like
Yeah, totally.
why isn't there, because you were talking to me earlier about cancel culture and you said, "Well, I don't think it's anything that has to do with something that is illegal." Right? Because
Yes.
the government system should step in, take up the case, have a proper court case like we know, and determine if that individual is guilty or not, right?
Yeah.
But um, you know, in this case, for example, he was grooming a minor. Why was there no court case, or was there one? Do you know?
I am not I don't think there was a court case afterwards, but I have an example of one with Nairo. So stuff came out and it was like he had sexual relations with a minor
Okay.
and he got canceled and banned on Twitch and this and that. He didn't. and then
Deplatformed, yeah, okay.
deplatformed. Yeah, and then there was like a potential court case coming up, but it was him suing the accuser.
Oh,
Jump. So everyone's knee jerk reaction was, let's get rid of this guy. A
right.
year later, court case comes out. He was the victim. He was raped.
Oh, wow.
So he got canceled and everything off someone's knee jerk reaction because one person went to Twitter.
And he was actually the victim.
The court case came out. I this is as far as I like know. I could be wrong here, but
Okay. Yeah,
so
that's
once
interesting.
once the justice system actually kicked in and not just people running around on social media,
Hmm.
it was turned out that he was not, he was the victim.
Hmm.
So not only did he lose his livelihood,
But
he
he
was
was
also the
also,
victim, yeah.
yeah, also the
And he was
victim.
getting harassed. He was, I assume Twitter probably harassed him, went after him and stuff because that's what they tend to do.
Right. So these are terrible things, and we want to kind of we're going over cancel culture, but we want to give both sides. And this example where there's no justice system intervention, I
Hmm.
think is what cancel culture is meant, like one of its primary functions was to remove people who had been overlooked by the justice system, who had done terrible things. So there have been cases where people have not been prosecuted, and I think of one example of he was in university and he raped a female behind a garbage can in an alley, and had gotten off on the case and was not in prison. And this was mainly due to the fact that he had connections, he had a lot of money, his parents bailed him out, and they paid for the best lawyers and they got him off. So now Twitter sees it as, well, not Twitter, but a large group of people on social media sees it as their job to make this guy's life, um, to make him con- condemn condemn him because of the terrible thing that he did,
Hmm.
where the justice system missed, right? So
But
this is this is
maybe
the
they should be
pro, I
going
think.
after the justice system and not what they
Yeah,
feel is
the
their
problem with
right to
that
attack somebody, right?
is that it's very, very hard to take down a whole system, whereas it's much easier to make somebody else's life
Yeah,
hard.
and that's probably leads to one of the questions where we're gonna have down the line with, like, do we actually think it's doing anything? Is it actually making any changes?
Right,
Is it accomplishing anything? Like, instead
right.
of going after the bigger change, like maybe the justice system,
Hmm.
they're going after like one individual. Like rather than going for systemic
Hmm.
problems, they'll go after one individual.
Well, here's where I'm going to give you a good case of cancel culture. I think
Hmm.
this ended up working out quite well, and this has to do with the Bon Appetit magazine. I'm not sure if you've heard of it or know anything about it. But what ended up happening, the Bon Appetit magazine and group, was a large group that did a lot of work with food. They were in the food industry. They created a magazine, and then they displayed food all throughout I think it was the last 5 years or so. They started getting bigger and bigger, and they also had a very big YouTube channel, and it centered around these cooks working in a test kitchen. And in that test kitchen, they would make all sorts of fun recipes and do all sorts of fun things. And they had a huge following on YouTube. But what ended up coming out after the George Floyd protests, was people started obviously feeling more empowered, and they didn't want to be people of color didn't want to be looked down on at their place of work. And it came out that the Bon Appetit magazine and the whole organization of Bon Appetit was being very, very racist, like pretty much just straight racist. They were underpaying those people of color compared to the white people. They weren't giving them the same opportunities. They had people of color just to fill quotas and look good on YouTube,
Hmm.
and all of it was really, really egregious racism, in my opinion. If you want to hear if you if you want to look for some reporting on this, please feel free to kind of get more meat and potatoes of the case. But I'm just going to give you that basic overview. And what ended up happening is I think the YouTube channel got shut down. I think a lot of people got fired, canceled. They got canceled,
Hmm.
and in my opinion, for good reason. And now this is where you are saying, well, why can't we go after the justice system? And in this case, it was a system. It was the system within the Bon Appetit Corporation that brought them down because it was inherently racist. So things like that, where people come out with stories on social media. Let's say it was a previous employee. She comes out with a story, and then somebody else feels empowered to come out with their story, who had also been an employee, and then these things kind of get added up, and then social media comes out and says, "Hey, what you've been doing is wrong, and we are not going to support you anymore. We're going to
Mhm.
boycott you, and therefore you're going to go out of business." Like this is a good example. Do, what do you think of this
Well, like
example?
to
Yeah.
me, the justice system should be in a place where these people feel comfortable to report to the authorities and not have to go straight to social media to get the traction, right?
Hmm. So in
So
this
obviously,
case, do you think they
obviously
should have
the
gone to the justice system?
well, that's like probably the what's wrong with the justice system, right? Is these people don't feel like the authorities would have done anything, so they go to social media. Like I don't blame them for that.
Right.
I'm just saying that it should be separate from social media. Like this justice system should be in favor of them going there first, then going to social media first.
Right. I just don't think in a case like this you're going to have the justice system on your side, because what the justice system would have to do is say, hey, pay your employees the same amount. And then they would go, no, we have every privilege and right to pay our employees what we want to pay them. And they can come up with all sorts of justification. This person, doesn't do as good of work as this other person, but they can still have systemic racist biases within those, right? So that's where I think cancel culture is doing good, um, by showing, that these corporations are inherently racist. And it it's interesting that you think, okay, maybe the justice system can help in this regard, but to me this one is out of their hands.
Only because of the product of where they're at, right? Like in an ideal world they were perfect and they could do investigations and figure this out, then we wouldn't essentially need cancel culture, right? Like
Yeah,
this is
I mean,
exactly the
but that's
point
but we're
where the
not at that
state
point.
is
We're not
failing,
there.
right?
Well, yeah, to you, in your opinion, the state is failing, but to other people who are more, um, they want more free speech or less regulations, right? They think the state is fine. They think that the free market will take care of this, right? This is the free market idea, and that's where cancel culture comes in. They say we are kind of like, this product is negative for these reasons, so we'll find a different market. We'll find a new company that's less racist, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it depends on your point of view. And even if we wanted to get to that, even if we all agreed we want to get to that perfect system where the state can take care of these, we're just not there yet, right? So
Yeah.
what do we do in the meantime?
Yeah, like it I don't think we're really super disagreeing. Like I think going to social media is the right thing to do because of the failure of the justice system, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
It's not like in every like say the justice system was great, going to social media first, like to me, like doesn't seem the right thing. It's only because it's a product of a failure
Right. The
in
justice
certain
system.
regards. Yeah, like I don't blame them for doing that at all. Like I think that's probably what was best.
Hmm. It's just it's 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 tough to really understand where these people are coming from when they go to the social medias, because they are people of color, right? And they
Yeah,
inherently have a less faith in the justice system, and they're
yeah.
probably right in having less faith in the justice system.
Hmm.
So we, have grown up kind of a different life than them. We kind of feel
Yeah.
like we can go to the justice system,
Oh
and
no, without a doubt. Yeah,
right, and
and
it'll be easier for us to get. To,
it's the same with women too. With like the Harvey Weinstein stuff,
yeah.
like them trying to take down like a wealthy white man for the crimes that he committed, right? Like they went to social media
Hmm.
because they know the justice system wasn't going to help them,
Hmm.
but
Exactly.
like in turn like it eventually came and did do its job after the social media outrage, right?
Yeah. So that's the other thing is, what comes first, the justice system or the cancel culture attempt, right?
Hmm.
Well, if the cancel culture attempt comes first, the justice system will most likely follow if the case is there. If the case is not there, then the cancel culture will continue, right? If they feel the case should have been there, or if it was something that just wasn't like illegal, right?
Hmm.
So, anyways, I think I kind of wanted to move on a little bit here. So, what I wanted to go over was kind of, I mean, we talked about politics a little bit, but
Yeah.
I heard an interesting argument on a podcast that was explaining why the right wing wants to continue to talk about cancel culture in the current media environment. And they explained that when you look at politics as left and right wing, those who are on the right wing, they're kind of divided when it comes to economic issues. So, for example, what should the minimum wage be? What benefits should there be? What should we have healthcare? All these kind of economic issues. The right wing individuals are more divided, but what they are united on is social issues. Most of them really don't like cancel culture, right? On the right wing. Whereas on the
Hmm.
left wing, people are more united about economic issues. They are they all want minimum wage to be higher, they all want free healthcare, this kind of thing. But when it comes to social issues, they are divided. So when you look at the current media environment of what's happening, if you watch more right-wing leaning news outlets, you'll probably see them talking about cancel culture. And recently there was a scandal, well not a scandal, but there was the news that Dr. Seuss had removed some of their books from publication and that Mr. Potato Head was now being relabeled as just Potato Head. Now to me these are not cancel culture.
No.
This is because, and I'll explain that they're not cancel culture because Potato Head is made by Hasbro and they can make whatever decisions they want to about how the product is named or displayed or sold. And the publisher doesn't want to publish some of Dr. Seuss's books because they have racist imagery. That's just them updating what their beliefs are, right? They want
Yeah.
to be they want to be a better product. They want to have better products and kind of convey their ideas by what they're selling. And to me, that's not cancel culture. That's two companies kind of coming up with different ideas of how they want to portray their brands. This is normal in the environment of all markets, right? They update their product. But what's happening is the right wing media is jumping on this and saying cancel culture. They're canceling Dr. Seuss. They're canceling Mr. Potato Head, which is just to me not true. And I think you agree with that, right, Johnny?
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
So what they're doing though is they're trying to keep the people on the right united. Like I said, they want them all to be focused on this idea of cancel culture and why it's bad and why it's removing things that you had loved in the past. So if you're if you're kind of if you're kind of looking at the full environment of what's going on, and this is in the United States, the Biden administration has released a huge package for the economy that's like 1.3, 1.8 trillion dollars, like a huge recovery package for the COVID vaccine and how they're dealing with the COVID virus, right? But the right wing media doesn't want you to focus on that
Hmm.
because people are divided on their side about how that package is being delivered. They want you to be united about cancel culture. So it's interesting to me that we have this group of people on the right who don't like cancel culture. And if we ask them dearly, they would say, we don't like it. We don't want it anymore. We want it to go away. We want it to stop. But the media on the right wing is using it to keep viewership and to keep people enraged at the left. So it's kind of a weird system where they actually, the right wing media does want it, but the people truly don't want it. Johnny, do
Yeah.
you have any thoughts about this? Does that make sense?
I think it makes total sense. They're just trying to like keep everyone enraged and fueled up and ready to like pounce on anything. Like
Hmm.
um and it's and the people when they keep constantly getting like more and more about this cancel culture, like especially with the Mr. Potato and Dr. Seuss, like they're like, "Oh, I grew up with these. I read these and now they're getting canceled." Like I grew up just fine and I read these. Like
Yeah, yeah.
it's stemming back to their beliefs and their traditions are now being seen as like racist and stuff, there
Mhm.
that then that like fuels the anger even more, and then that makes them focus on things that are less important.
Mhm.
Like it's could be one of the reasons why someone like Donald Trump and more of these super rights are being elected, because they're just saying stuff that are more like what gets the most views and the clicks rather than what's like more important, such
Mhm.
as what's inside this big bill.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. I think we can't leave out the left-wing group that is divided on cancel culture, because there are a lot of moderates, and I listened to Bill Maher when researching this podcast, and he is a left-wing individual. He has very strong views on why the right is bad and what they're doing for the country is bad, but he doesn't like cancel culture.
Yeah.
And he specifically cited one example with regards to a worker that I looked into a little deeper. And he's a normal worker. He's working for a company that he really liked, and he had a tough time getting that job because he was a person of color. And he was seen driving by, and he was doing the white power symbol, which I'm not sure if you know what that is, but it's pretty much the OK symbol with your hand, where you have three fingers out and you have. I better stop doing that.
What, the like the AOK thing?
Yeah,
That's
that's now
white power?
that means white power now. Yes. So this is like one of those things that most people don't know. Like for you, you're not on social media, you don't know this, but it has been used. If you watch Trump rallies, they'll put out this symbol kind of to be egregious, I guess, to
Man,
be
they take Pepe and now they take
yeah.
my AOK?
Yeah, it's all gone. So he was seen making this symbol, and the social media storm began, and he got removed from his position. And and when you look at the case a little deeper, he was I think he was a Latin American, so he wasn't really a white individual who was shouting for white power with this symbol, but he was caught in a company car making the symbol outside of his vehicle, and the company. Now this happened after the George Floyd protest, and I think this is a big issue with what's going on. Is that the company wanted to appear as though it was less racist in nature and wanted to put out a good public opinion and therefore fired him without
Mm-hmm.
doing any real investigation into him and who he is and what he was actually doing. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this, how companies are taking the wrong actions when it comes to helping make their workplaces less racist or misogynistic or bigoted in any way, is they are just trying to use small scapegoats and firing the wrong people to make their company outwardly looking better to the general public. So yeah, what did you
Mm-hmm.
think about that?
Yeah, I don't know. To me, a lot of this stuff just seems super like knee jerk. Like the first sort of
Mhm.
reaction that comes to mind, it's what everyone like sort of pounces on.
Mhm.
Um, like to me, like a lot of this stuff, like I feel like it kind of has to hinge on sort of the context and like the intent.
Mhm.
Like if he was just throwing that symbol out with like no malice, like there was like no motive or intent of any sort, like to me that seems a little not as bad as someone that's like specifically targeting somebody
Mhm.
for the company image. Like I like it's hard to blame the company because that it's like sort of their right because of their image.
Mhm.
Like they want to portray a good image, and since he was doing it like via company truck, like it gives them even more incentive, right? It wasn't something outside of work that he was doing.
Yeah. I
He
think
was painting that company in a bad light.
yeah, this is where I wanted to kind of circle us back to the initial example I gave with the man at the TFC game. Because in Canada, when he got fired, he appealed and got his job back. But in the
Yeah.
United States, they don't have the same laws that protect you from a wrongful termination.
Mm-hmm.
So in this case, the guy got fired and he can't really do anything to get his job back. The company kind of has the right to fire him for whatever reason they feel, which is
Yeah.
kind of sad. And that's maybe one of the systemic things that we want to change,
Hmm.
but is much more work. And then the other thing I wanted to bring up was what how would we feel how do we feel about the men who were at the Charlottesville rally that was so um, terrible, the men who were holding tiki torches and screaming white power and other terrible things about uh, other religious groups. They were found on social media and their faces were in many pictures, and I believe a lot of them got fired from their jobs. So do we feel that's a pro for cancel culture, that those individuals paid a price and were removed from their job? Or do we think that they shouldn't have lost their job? This is the discussion. Like, what do you think, Johnny?
Yeah, like the way I sort of would want to try to frame it is that if it's like a social good, like if getting rid of these people rather like if canceling them provides more good than bad, like if they're getting canceled and they're sort of changing and reforming and then like being reintroduced or whatever, for example, like getting a new job afterwards,
Hmm.
then I could see that being like a good thing because like they're changing and not harming people anymore or
Hmm.
saying hateful things. Whereas if say they do change and they can't get a job back or anything, I think that's sort of like a social negative.
Yeah, I think the issue I'm seeing is that when somebody is canceled like this and they potentially lose their job, we're in a situation where that person is now even more entrenched in their original ideas, right? Oh, I like, for example, this Charlottesville, those people were fairly right wing. They had racist ideals, and then they see that they're getting canceled and they lose their job. Oh, the left wing mob did this to me on social media. I hate them even more. There's
Yeah.
almost less chance of them reforming, I think. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? And
They're
and
like
of
doubling
course,
down.
yeah. And of course they don't think their ideas are wrong to begin with, but we as a society believe their ideas to be wrong and
Yeah.
they should reform. So this is where the
Like
the difference in ideas
it's
comes
like a
back.
harmful opinion though. It's not like, for example, like the Dixie Chicks.
Hmm.
They in 2003 at a concert they mentioned that they didn't support the Iraq War
Hmm.
and were ashamed of Bush, and they got essentially canceled for that.
Right.
Like they got blacklisted from thousands of country radio stations. They got loads of backlash, death threats. They damaged their like sales, and they couldn't sell very many tickets when they went south. They
Hmm.
got shunned from the country music awards. Like that, to me, saying that isn't a harmful thing at all. That's just a difference of opinions. They didn't like war, but for them to get essentially canceled for that, to me that seems horrendous. Like that is not what cancel culture should be about.
Right.
And
But
that sort of stems over to like your like when you're like walking on thin ice, like you got to be careful of what you're saying because it's
yeah.
not always just the hateful or harmful things.
Hmm. So yeah, we have to try to. So what you're saying is we need to find the line between what is harmful and what is just an opinion, right?
Yeah.
And maybe just a contrary opinion to popular belief, um, compared to a harmful opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that.
It's a tough one because then if something is like hateful or harmful or such, to me that's when the state should sort of be handling it because
Hmm.
there's certain laws and rights and stuff people have, right?
Hmm.
Where
Yeah.
then if that's the case, then culture cancel culture shouldn't really have a place.
Yeah.
But yeah,
We've been over that discussion, and I think I want to kind of move on from this. Did you have any final thoughts about this before we move on to our next?
no.
Okay.
I think yeah.
Okay, cool. So what I wanted to go over next was this idea of separating the art from the artist. And what I mean by that is in recent times, last 5, 10 years, we've seen a lot of public figures who are actual, like, common everyday names, household names be reported for terrible acts. We have Chris Brown, we have Bill Cosby, stuff like this. Now, do we, and a bunch of other stand-up comedians, do we stop watching their stuff? Do we completely remove ourselves from their different media sources? Do we stop listening to their music? Do we stop watching their shows? Do we never rerun their comedy specials? Do we never have them on a new comedy special? All this stuff. What do you think? And are we able, as human beings, to separate the art from the artist?
It's it's a tough one. Like, to me, I would not want to support that artist,
Hmm.
but like the art is still there.
Yeah, that's the part that is so tough.
Like, in order, like, there's, like, to me, getting rid of all the art, it would be like a form of censorship,
Mm,
because the art is there. Like, it's sort of like, say, like a book or something, there's a an author that gets like ousted or
mm,
whatever, or
mm.
outed, and like all of a sudden, what, we burn the book and censor all the book. Like, to me, that seems like we have laws against censorship and stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So
So if there was ways of not supporting the artist but still consuming the art, would be the perfect form, in my
okay,
opinion.
yeah. I think what people are kind of thinking is like, let's say that we're talking about music, and there's a musician who people love, and then something terrible comes out about them, and all their songs are played on the oldies hits, and all this stuff. So now the radio company has to make a decision. Do we stop playing all their music? Right?
Well,
Like the
for the radio station, when they play the music, they have to pay for it, right?
yeah.
So if there was a way of them not having to pay the artist, then they could, I would make an argument for them being able to play the song.
Oh, so if it was free for them to play.
Yeah, because if they're paying the artist, they're supporting the artist.
Right. Huh. Interesting. Okay.
But at the same time, I guess you could also make the argument, if you're playing this art, while not supporting the artist, you're also sort of not condemning their behavior.
Yeah, exactly. So then people listening who disagree would stop listening, and you might lose viewers or listeners, right?
Yeah. They're like,
Yeah.
"Oh, I don't like this guy. I don't want to listen to any of his music," right?
Yeah. And some people, you're allowed to have that opinion. I'm just wondering, can we do this as human beings? Yeah. So, I mean, my other example for you is, Christopher Nolan. He's a brilliant director. Many of your favorite movies have come from him. What if it came out that he was, doing terrible things, and people got onto him and they canceled him? And he didn't commit any crimes, but he, got canceled. And then he came out with a new movie. He has a brand new movie. It looks great. A bunch of new actors we never heard of, but
Yeah.
the trailer looks amazing. Would you watch that movie?
To me, I would not go to the theaters and watch it.
Okay, so you'd pirate it in some way or something, or try to watch it for
I'd
free?
try to watch it in a way that I would not support the artist, which is because in a lot of like the actors, they get sort of paid for the movie. So the movie's already made, they have their flat amount or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So essentially it'd be like not supporting the studio that
Okay.
hired Nolan, for example.
Yeah, so with that in mind, like most studios wouldn't do that. They wouldn't hire Nolan, and then he would be pretty much out of a job,
Yeah.
right? So,
Like if like it would be have to be something super serious that he would not not reform from.
yes. And that's a good segue to Reformation. Individuals online and people who have done terrible things that are not illegal, just kind of harmful. Um, they have done them in the past, or they used language that is not appropriate today. Like what how do we judge individuals' reformation? How do we know that they've reformed? Because we see a lot of people digging into other people's history when they go to cancel them. And
Yeah.
there's two thoughts. One is, oh, you're just trying to get them, when you look at their history. You're just trying to make it seem like they're bad, but they could have reformed. But the
Yeah.
other thing about searching into their history is to say, no, they've had a pattern of let's say, racism. They've had a pattern of racism for a long time. And they're just they're just showing their normal behavior, their normal racist behavior to the world now, and this person needs to be stopped. We've looked at their history, they've done it a bunch of times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
So
there's a big difference there. Um, One example I have was James Gunn. Do you ever hear about him?
no, I haven't.
So he was the director of like Guardians of the Galaxy.
Oh, okay.
So he made like a comment about Trump, criticizing Trump in like 2018.
Mhm.
So they ended up digging into his older tweets from like 2008, 2012 sort of thing.
Right.
And he had made jokes about like rape and 9/11 and child abuse. But it wasn't like he had made jokes all the way up to present day.
Right.
So then he got loads of backlash for these old tweets.
Hmm.
He came out with a big apology and such, and Disney fired him.
Right.
And this is an interesting example because it was almost like the contrary to cancel culture, where loads and loads of people came to his defense. Lots of celebrities, all the cast of Guardians of the Galaxy. Like he got a big showing of support on how this was not him.
Right.
So and then jump like 8 months later, Disney actually rehired him.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I think you're right. Like the knee-jerk reaction needs to stop, I think.
Hmm.
And we do need to, but we need to have proof of reformation, I think. It's
Yeah,
another very difficult thing because somebody can issue an apology, but that could be a hollow apology. And
yeah, no, totally. And then like 10 months later, start saying it again. Like
hmm
at that point, then they obviously not changing their views. Like
hmm and then you need to give them a third chance, and then
yeah,
it's just
then
like, oh
that's where
God.
it's tough. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's that's mainly most of the things I wanted to go over with this discussion, but let's get into some
Yeah,
questions.
I just want to quickly touch on sort of. I
Yeah.
think like censorship sort of plays a bit of a role in some of this cancel culture.
Yeah, for sure.
Like the First Amendment in the states essentially says like it protects the freedom of speech and expression against all levels of government censorship,
Hmm.
and direct censorship of the internet is prohibited. So a lot of people see like them posting something on Twitter and Twitter banning it, being like this is not right, you shouldn't say this,
Hmm.
as like a against their First Amendment, against sort of their, like it's a form of censorship, and that sort of angers them, right?
Yeah.
Like in August 1st, 2015 to and up to August 1st, 2016. So in 1 year, there was 2.6 million tweets involving anti-Semitic comments.
Okay.
So it's so lots of hate speech is beginning to like be more prevalent.
Hmm.
So it's super tough for social media platforms because on the US with their First Amendment is the hate speech is technically protected under the First Amendment, so like almost anything goes. Whereas on the other side, the platforms are getting like hit by the EU and advertisers to sort of clean up.
Right.
So like it's hard to fall on what side because the EU is like we shouldn't have all this hate speech, but on the American sort of First Amendment, everything goes.
Yeah.
And it is like a lot of it's sort of viewed as the public sphere of discussion is sort of moving to online with like Twitter.
Right.
But I this is where I sort of disagree with the like the public sphere being the area and social life where individuals come together to speak freely, to discuss and identify societal problems. and through that discussion influence political action.
Yeah,
So
it's super important. Yeah, go on.
for example, parks, arenas, like venues, like or streets, like any sort of public place.
Hmm.
So to me, going to Twitter and saying that's the new public sphere is not correct because Twitter is like a private corporation.
Yeah.
The only thing they care about is their profits.
Hmm.
So like the internet sort of eliminates an element of randomness. It like reduces exposure to a variety of views and perspectives. And and with the internet it's super easy to have like a confirmation bias.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So it seems to be like showing this large polarity and divide these days. Like whereas Twitter, like they'll just start banning you for certain things because like they'd be harming their profits.
Hmm.
Whereas so like some people be like, oh, that's my freedom of speech,
Yeah,
but
but
at the same
yeah,
time you're accepting their terms of service to use their platform.
yeah, exactly. And I was just gonna say that with regards to this, like freedom of speech, well, you're not actually getting arrested or anything like this. I mean,
Yes.
in the UK, in the sorry, I'm not sure about the UK anymore because it's not a part of the EU, but in the EU, um, they do have punishments for those who do hate speech. So it's a law. But in the United States, you're not going to be arrested, but the market decides. So Twitter doesn't want you because if it has a large group of people who have anti-Semitic views, well, advertisers won't put their money onto Twitter. So if you okay, what do we do? We're going to have to find a new platform because we've all been banned off of Twitter. Let's go to Parler, for example, which is a
Yeah.
new one that got put up. And if you don't know anything about Parler, it was short-lived, I guess, social media platform that had mostly right-wing individuals who were kind of far right-wing and had pretty pretty controversial views. Let's just say that, and it eventually lost a lot of ad support, and it even lost its ability to go up on the Apple Store and the Google Play Store, which are the two biggest ways to download apps.
Yeah.
So those two cut off Parler. So this is kind of another question: is should the companies, you know, one company wants to allow free speech, essentially Parler. They want to allow the most egregious, terrible free speech, but it's all protected under the law.
Yeah.
But the other two companies, Google and Apple, who support them, who support like they're a support platform for Parler, they don't support their ideals. They cut them off. They don't want them anymore. Should that be allowed?
Yeah, because it's sort of like they're censoring the entire program from just the average person to use it.
Right.
Like in terms of like maybe US policy, like they shouldn't be, but in terms of other parts of the world, it's within their right. So it's super hard. There's so many gray areas because everything all the social media is so global.
Yeah.
Like with their terms of service and stuff. Like with people complaining against censorship, like if you go into a store, like they have rules where like you have to wear shoes and have a shirt in order to shop, right? And
Yeah.
if you don't follow those rules, you get kicked out.
Yeah.
If you
Same.
go on Twitter and don't follow their rules, their terms of service, you get kicked out. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
to me,
Totally.
what is the difference?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know for sure. It's
Yeah, so
just yeah.
I guess we from there we can move on to the final segment of sort of just questions that were interesting to us.
Okay. Let's do it. Johnny, hit me with your first question.
Has it accomplished anything? Um, are we sort of fixating on the minutia, distracting from like attempts to achieve a broader change? Is there like big names that are being taken down, like politicians? Like who are the most vulnerable? Like unknown individuals?
Mhm.
So has it accomplished anything?
Yeah, and I think that's the big question, right? And people would say yes, people would say no. Like I said with Bon Appetit, like we that company kind of got removed from society, and I think that was a net plus. And Donald Trump gets banned off of all the social media platforms, and some people would say that's a plus, some people would say that's a negative. So how do we feel about it? And what's the goal, right? We have to ask ourselves, okay, what's the goal of cancel culture?
Hmm.
we kind of want to have people change their thoughts. And I think a lot of people like myself and yourself had different opinions of certain groups, minorities maybe, before we started to kind of have an enlightening, and there was a movement to change people's minds about certain things, especially after the George Floyd protests. And in my personal experience, I changed a lot of how I thought, and I really did some reflection and stuff. So this kind of changing the society's thoughts and ideals about certain characteristics of our society and how our society could be better is the goal. Is cancel culture doing that? I think it's making people more aware of what they do and say, and how what they do and what they say can come back and really bite them and really make it hard for them to have a good livelihood. And it's one of those cases where it feels to me like it's one of those societies in the olden days where like everything you did was you just died. Like if you like any crime you committed, the sentence was always murder. Like the sentence was always death. You
Death
know,
penalty. Yeah.
death penalty for everything. You like stole something, death penalty, right? So like this kind like that, and I'm comparing that to like you do anything bad on social media, you lose your job, right? That's kind of the rough. That's kind of how I'm seeing it. Maybe that's not always the case,
Yeah.
but it really makes people aware that what they're doing or how they feel about certain other groups or how they perceive their society is not correct, and they need to change and reform. And maybe by everybody doing that and kind of thinking, okay, you know what, I should really act in this manner, is going to make our society a bit better. Now that's in the in the best light possible, but in real life people kind of get more entrenched in their ideas. Like I said before, people see this cancel culture and they dislike it even more, and they're even more upset, and they have even worse. Their opinions that were on the borderline are now further into the vicious category. Do you know what I mean? So it's
Yeah.
hard for us to say, is this doing anything? Is this accomplishing anything? Are we making progress? It's really hard for us to determine that. I don't
It's
know.
it's whether you believe in individual choice coming together, or if the only way you can see change is through policy. It's sort
Right.
of similar to how with climate change and the environment, some people are like, oh, everyone needs to do their part, whereas the other side sees everyone doing their part making very little difference because, oh, there's only a select few that are doing their part, and we need policy change to affect everybody.
Right.
So if I was to take that approach with cancel culture, that we need to aim more towards policy to get rid of systemic racism rather than showing one case at a time,
Right.
where like it's sort of just reinforcing the left. Like to me, it's not convincing that many people coming over to a more left progressive viewpoint on minorities and stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas we need maybe more policy to more promote or get rid of this systemic racism. And maybe you see a lot of this. That's why you see a lot of protests, is because they want policy change rather than just trying to convince one person at a time.
Hmm. Yeah. It's tough. I mean, it's harder to change policy than it is to change an individual's way. But if we can't, and like you said, it's probably better for the society to have those policy changes. It's just that a lot of people would disagree with them, right? A lot of people with different upbringings are going to have different opinions of how the government should regulate things. And the biggest example I see is hate speech. Is hate speech, right? Hate speech
Hmm.
is protected. Like you can't do any form of hate speech
And
in
we
the EU, but in the United
sort
States
of
we just
going
can't.
backwards when Trump was elected, right? Like
Hmm.
it sort of undid a lot of progress in that regards.
Yes, but it what happened was a lot of people who had these feelings already now felt as though those feelings were justified. So I don't know if the progress was actually there because people were just hiding their true opinions um, until Trump.
Hiding their true opinions because they were scared of being ostracized.
Right. Yeah.
And it's funny because when we were brainstorming ideas of what we wanted to do for episodes at the very beginning of topics, one of the ones I wrote down was fear of ostracism,
Yeah.
which I didn't even think at the time that's pretty much cancel culture in today's day.
Yeah, and it's hiding your true opinions from the public realm because you don't
Yeah.
want to be ostracized. And you know, what does that say about you as an individual if you have opinions that are contrary to the public belief? Or what does it say about the public that they won't evaluate your opinions and
Yeah.
then give you a counter opinion? They'll just simply cancel you, right?
Yeah.
So this is a tough question
Yeah.
and this is a tough topic. So,
Okay,
uh,
we'll move on to the next question that I have.
okay, sounds good.
We've discussed this a bit, but what is the correct reaction? What is the correct response?
Okay,
Like
so
should someone lose their job or not? Should someone be punished? Like how severity should their punishment be?
yeah, yeah, so that's a tough one, right? So we have kind of made it. Well, what we're doing now doesn't seem to be the right thing, in my opinion. We're harassing. The harassment is part of the problem, I think.
100%.
I mean, maybe you're given an alternative opinion. You come out and you say something terrible that is harmful. Like let's say you say something that is harmful because it's sexist or racist or whatever. Um, it's not illegal, so you're not put in jail. And they make you aware. They say, "Hey, listen, like this really made me feel terrible, and I don't know how to even talk to you. Like, maybe it's somebody personal within your friend group. Like, hey, this was terrible. Reading this made me
Hmm.
cry, it made me super upset." And they're like, "Oh, well, you have your opinions and I have mine." And then, you kind of have to say, like, no, like your opinions are just they're kind of old, they're archaic, they don't make any sense anymore, and you're offending a lot of people. So then they have to kind of have a reckoning. And this is what I said about reform. Like, what if that person just doesn't want to reform? What do we do
Yeah.
then? Like, what do we do? And then I guess this is the crux of your question.
What
I
just
don't,
to,
I don't know. Like, yeah, can
do you
we
feel like
just?
just to interrupt, do you feel like those conversations are being had?
I guess they must be had at some point, but I think what happens a lot of times nowadays is people are in an echo chamber. So somebody says something, and everybody that they know and have known for a long time, maybe their friends or family, they just say, "Yeah, okay, whatever. That's what you say. That's how you do the thing." But then social
Hmm.
media comes in and they say, "Hey, like that's terribly wrong. You can't do this," and then that person is confused and they're like, what? Like, I've always said this within my circle of
Hmm.
friends. All the circle of friends saying, "Oh, this is ridiculous. Like, I
Oh,
can't believe it that you're being attacked. I can't
yeah.
believe you're having all these people come and harass you." And then all of a sudden you lose your job and you're like, "Whoa, what's going on?" Right?
I
So,
Yeah, that's a really good point. There was an example of recently with a basketball player that was streaming on Twitch, and he said an anti-Semitic word, the K word, just
oh,
randomly playing the game, and it totally like like of all the words to say, it totally looked like he had no idea what that word meant, not a clue, but he was just saying it because I think people around him said it.
right.
So like it wasn't like it was intention, like it wasn't intent of harming anybody. He was kind of saying it because people around him said it and it seemed normal. Like I might be misconstruing it, and he actually did know, but like in my view it seemed like he ended up like having to step away from the team. He got banned on Twitch, all this stuff, and I could see people being super confused around that because, well, I see people saying this all the time. Like, what's going on? Not knowing what exactly that word means, right? Obviously, I'm not
Yeah.
saying
Yeah.
it's a good thing to say, but like that's sort of the confusion part where it's like I don't know what I did wrong, right? Like,
Yeah. And I think that's what gets people more entrenched in their beliefs is they just don't understand what they did wrong because they've never really been um, or they've been using the words terribly wrong. Like this happened with the word gay. People use the word gay to mean negative things for a very long time, and
Yeah.
then it came out like, hey, these people who are gay, they don't like you using this word this way. Totally makes sense. Everybody who had some logic in their brain was like, yeah, I don't think
Yeah.
we should call the people who are actually that in this negative light. Like we shouldn't use this word in a negative way, and people reform their language. It's totally fine. But if somebody literally doesn't know what that means, they're like, "What are you talking about?" Like if somebody actually didn't know the definition of the word gay, they'd be like,
Yeah.
"What are you talking about? I just this is just something I use all the time," and then they'd get upset because you're getting canceled, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so what do we do? Well, like what do we do if somebody like that doesn't understand the word, uses it in a terribly negative way, and then doesn't reform? I mean, I don't know. It's just
Hmm. It. I wonder if there's a way of sort of in like more of an education perspective, maybe informing people of what is more politically correct. Like to me, just saying that sounds odd, but like for example, like the Redskins,
yeah.
they got their name changed obviously because it was a slur
Hmm.
and it was terrible. But a lot of people are like, we've always had that. It's why all of a sudden change it now? Like, what's wrong with it, sort of thing, right?
Yeah, and I
Like,
think
if there
yeah,
was a way of maybe updating education to maybe show what is not right to say these days. Like, I don't know, things are a product of their times, right? So things changing to be more updated makes total sense, but a
yeah,
lot of people don't see it that way.
yeah, and I think that's another good thing to touch on is a lot of people had issues with people tearing down statues recently of
Yeah.
certain. I mean, in the United States, they were tearing down slaver statues, people who were in the civil rights in the Civil War, who fought on the wrong side, and I'm going to say wrong, and that's my opinion, definitely
Yeah.
the wrong side. They were taken down, and people are like, "Hey, you're disturbing history here. Like this is the an appeal to history, in my opinion, which I think is a fallacy for this argument because you can you can read about that individual in the books, and they will
Mhm.
portray them in the correct light in that reading. You know that
Yeah.
they were not in the right. They were terrible people who had these terrible ideas that they wanted to keep slavery around. So if we remove the statue, what we're actually doing is we're removing the glorification of that individual.
Yeah.
We're making it so that person is no longer on a pedestal, no longer seen as some sort of brilliant general or something like that, right? So this is where we kind of have to see history as you know something we can read in a book, not something we should glorify.
Yeah.
So again, what should we do? Can we teach people? Can we try to re-educate them without them losing their jobs? I hope so. That would be the
Mhm.
best approach, in my opinion. How we go
Agreed.
about doing that, I don't know. Like social rehab, that sounds crazy. Um, like it's, you
Yeah,
know,
because a lot of sort of the other punishments seem to be more state involved, like maybe like some sort of community service or stuff like that, right?
mhm.
Whereas cancel culture is almost strictly like social.
Yes. And I mean, there are ways for companies who see that their employee is getting attacked online for something they said or did that was bad and have them go to some sort of counseling or
Yeah.
some sort of retreat that informs them of what they did. And sensitivity training is a very common thing
Hmm.
nowadays, diversity training as well. So, like, these kind of programs exist.
Yeah, and I
And
think that stems back to that the guy at the football match where he got fired for a bit and then ended up being able to come back like 6 months later.
yeah,
Like I assume the company probably followed up to see if he had changed, if he reformed, maybe he had to do some sensitivity training like you were mentioning. Like to me that seems like an ideal sort of situation to someone having like their job removed.
yeah. And I think I think as a whole society needs to push that more than people losing their jobs. Right now we're not seeing that on social media. When something goes wrong, people say, "Hey, they should lose their job. They should lose their livelihood." And
Yeah.
I think people overreact to that. And you know what? Like this might be an opinion that people don't share. I think some people really think that those people should lose their jobs or
Yeah.
be ostracized in some way to make them pay. The only way I would see that being realistic is if they go through the training and they still are of the same mindset that they can use these terrible words or phrases or something like that, and they're just hopeless. Like I don't know.
Yeah, like it's easy for us to take this opinion, right? Because we're not usually the ones being hurt.
Yeah.
Whereas if someone's like being hurt and is on the receiving end of it, I could see them getting like angry and not wanting that person to ever come back, sort of thing, right?
Yes, for sure. And that, yeah, we again are very privileged, and people who are of color or women who feel as though somebody did something like that person did something so egregious they just shouldn't ever be back
Yeah.
in our social circles. They should never be back in society. They would feel angry and hurt. You're right, and we don't really know how they're feeling. So that's tough. That's really
So
tough. Yeah.
yeah, and that sort of segues into the last question that you wanted to
Yeah,
touch
my
on.
my last question is, does cancel culture act swifter when it comes to people of color? And what I mean by this is, if a person of color does something that we deem cancelable, how does society work in that regard? And what I'm thinking of is Chris Brown, right? Chris Brown obviously should have been canceled. He was beating his wife. And this is terrible. Should never happen. But a lot of people jumped on that really, really quick, and a lot of people, did said he should have been canceled and canceled him, and there was a huge campaign against him. But there are many white actors or musicians who have beat their wives in the same position, um, who, there's less kind of backlash on them. There's less notoriety. There's less um, pressure from the media, and you know what I mean.
Hmm.
There's less of a spotlight. Now, this could be due to the fact that his wife is Rihanna, who's also very famous. But you know what
Yeah.
I mean. Like I hate to think this, but it feels as though when it's a person of color who's being canceled, it's a lot easier for everyone to get on board. And I don't know if it's because racist individuals come out of the woodwork, but
Yeah.
like, what do you think?
Like I have another example that might kind of also shine light on this that question. Like uh I don't know what year it was, but Colbert came out with a tweet. It was one of those kind of tweets where it seemed sort of questionable on the surface, but it was a joke against like white privilege.
Right?
Like it
Okay.
had layers to it, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So it was offensive. It could be seen offensive to Asian Americans. So one woman that had some followers tweeted hashtag cancel Colbert after the satirical tweet,
Hmm.
and she just like instantly got like death threats, racism. She
Yeah.
was just sort of like bringing to light like, oh, I felt hurt to his tweet,
Hmm.
and then everyone just came out of the woodworks and canceled her for having an opinion that she didn't like of Colbert's tweet. So like
Yeah.
it was like instant, and like the harassment just never stopped. Like she had to get like burner phones, and she was like like followed and doxxed, and it was
Oh.
crazy that how swift it was for her as being like an Asian American trying to
Hmm.
cancel like Colbert being like a white guy, right?
Yeah. And this is because people, I think society just looks better on those who are white. I mean, it's
Hmm.
unfortunate, but it's true, and I think it's something we have to keep in mind when it
Yeah,
comes to somebody who maybe has done something questionable. And if you are, um, if you're seeing all this evidence against this person, well, maybe, or if you're seeing that somebody is getting accused of something and they're a person of color, maybe you should double check it, because people will jump on them quicker than
yeah.
they will jump on somebody who is white. And I mean, this is just like the person who committed those heinous murders recently in Atlanta. He gunned down several women of Asian
Brutal.
descent, and the the counts the police chief in charge said, "Oh, he was just having a bad day."
He
Like,
was just fed up.
he's just fed up and having a bad day. This You can't say that. That's terrible.
Fed up with what?
That's terribly egregious. And oh, he gave him the benefit of the doubt. No, 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 no. Like, that would never happen if that was a person of color, and that's
Yeah,
part of the issue.
totally.
But Johnny, this has been a tough conversation, I think,
Yeah.
and I think we're gonna close it out. Do you have any final thoughts? What did you think?
I think it went well. I think I got most of my stuff mentioned. I yeah, my pages on pages on pages, and
Yeah.
we covered a lot of stuff in this.
Yeah, this is going to be kind of a different one, and maybe we'll do this again with a different topic like this or something else that's more topical, but we're probably going to head back to more research-based discussions in our next
Yeah.
episode, which we hope you tune into. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, if you have anything you want to say, please email us at iqmindspodcast@gmail.com and let us know. Give us your hot take about this podcast. Let us know if we got anything wrong. We are also willing to reform if we had some terrible opinions. But let us know, and thank you again for listening. Until next time, where we give you something to think about.